Welcome, Bronco Nation, to my keys to the game for Boise State versus UCF. Boise State 0-1 after dropping a game versus top 10 program Washington, and UCF 1-0 after getting a big win, big beatdown win versus Kent State, a program that is towards the bottom tier of the group of five. So you have a team that lost to one of the top tier teams in college football and a team that won versus one of the bottom tier teams in college football. Now we have a chance to see where these programs really are at as they come up against two programs that are very equally matched. There'll be something we talk about in this video. Boise State versus UCF. We're going to talk about the keys to the game. We'll talk about series history, the one game series history between these two programs. We'll talk about key players for both Boise State and UCF. And we'll talk about the score prediction for this program. Keys to the game for Boise State and the score prediction at the end. So make sure you stick around all the way to the end. Before you can end this video, I want you to stop and put your score prediction in right now, and any thoughts you have on this game. I want you to put those in the comments, and I want this to be a two-way discussion. Watching the video and then putting your thoughts down, and then I'm going to come back afterwards. I'm going to read those, and I'm going to respond like I always do to anybody that comments on my videos, and we're going to have a discussion. And I want to see your score prediction before you get to mine and see how close they are, or maybe they're different. If there's UCF fans watching this, I want to see your score predictions and your thoughts on this game as well. So make sure you put those in the video, in the comments of this video before continuing. Boise State versus UCF. The game is taking place on September 9th, this Saturday, of course, 5 p.m. Mountain Central Time on FS1. This is a major game for Boise State. It's a major game for UCF as well, but they're a Power 5 team now coming to play at the Group of 5 level, coming to play Boise State on the blue, but they don't play like a Group of 5 team, and they've proven that. Boise State has not lost a home opener on the blue since 2001, and they are one of the winningest programs at home, third overall right now in FBS, at least with a 50-game minimum. Boise State third all-time, just below Oklahoma and Ohio State, with 112 wins and only 14 losses at the blue since 2003. So Boise State, a tough place to win at, but a program that's feeling a little bit down right now. Boise State lost that first game to Washington, which most people expected, but they lost in a way that most people were not anticipating, and it's really put Bronco Nation a little bit of his foot back. This is a major game for several reasons. Number one, obviously it's a chance for Boise State to restart their season, get that win versus a Power 5 team, UCF, kind of get that marquee resume-building win for potential contention in the New Year's Six. The New Year's Six is totally on the line for Boise State. The only thing a loss to Washington did was take them out of playoff contention, which we all knew Boise State wasn't going to the playoffs this year. It gives Boise State a chance now to reset their season, get to 1-1, or as coaches always say, you're always 0-0 coming season. So coming in 1-0 here for a chance to get to 1-0 and move on with the rest of their season and roll into the Mountain West, roll into Memphis, roll into the Mountain West schedule, and potentially have a chance to build themselves up to a top 25 New Year's Six bound program. And it all starts this game versus UCF. This is also, though, a big game symbolically because UCF, Boise State, they've been rivals. They've been those two teams competing for those New Year's Six bowls at the Group of 5 level. Well, now UCF has moved ahead of Boise State in a way that a lot of Boise State fans feel is not fair. Not that the UCF didn't deserve the move, but Boise State should have been part of that. Now, getting a win versus a UCF program that moved ahead of Boise State in a way that fans didn't think they should would show the world, the college football nation, that Boise State deserved to be in that conversation. I did a great video talking about 3 keys for the fans in this matchup. Make sure you go watch that. It talks about the 3 things we need to do to set ourselves apart in this conversation and prove that we belong and help our team get this win. So make sure you go watch that video. Also, make sure you watch the video that I just did on the UCF Sports YouTube channel. Great discussion with 2 passionate UCF fans and a fellow passionate Boise State fan, where we discussed about an hour-long video talking about this matchup and these two teams and their history and what this matchup means for both programs. So make sure you watch that video. I'll put links to both videos in the description. But for this matchup, Boise State is not favored at home, which is a rare spot for Broncos to be in. UCF is given a 77.6% chance of winning. Now, Boise State versus Washington, Washington had a 78.9% chance of winning. So only a 1.3% chance better than what UCF is being given. So Boise State is not the favorite here. They are the heavy underdog in this matchup. And maybe that makes a little bit sense. Boise State loses a game. UCF wins by a large margin. But Boise State is going to be playing the chip on their shoulder. That's not a good spot to be as a visiting team. Now, Boise State is, like I said, UCF favored in this matchup. And they're given a 3.5 points advantage according to Vegas. So not the wide margin that the Boise State versus Washington game was, but UCF heavily favored and given a slight lead according to Vegas betting. So Boise State a chance to prove that they're back in the discussion, that they should have been in the Power 5, and that they are in the discussion for the New Year's Six and to get their season back on track. It all starts versus UCF, and let's look real quick here at the program history. Boise State lost to UCF in their one other matchup in this series. Boise State, of course, 0-1 then versus UCF, a loss of 31-36, a game that Boise State controlled for the first half, and then often good adjustments by UCF, bad adjustments by Boise State, really poor offensive play calling cost Boise State the game in the end. Now, the play calling has been a point of discussion for Boise State fans versus Washington. Boise State, part of the reason that they lost by such a large margin, a lot of fans are putting on the offensive play calling, which emphasized a pass-heavy attack. Boise State attempting about 47 passes, I think it was, versus only 28 rushes, even though Boise State has three of the best rushers in school history currently on the program, and everyone thought Bush Hand was going to run a run-heavy attack. So the play calling is going to be heavily emphasized and under evaluation, just like it was versus that UCF team in 2021. There's also a third element to this game that makes it such a big game for Boise State in program history. That first game is Andy Avalos' first game with Boise State, and of course he lost. And this is a chance to redeem himself, to redeem the record, and put Boise State back on track. So Boise State trying to erase the past and build towards the future in this game versus UCF. Now, key players, we're going to go through Boise State and UCF, but starting off with Boise State, number one key player, and he was the key player last time as well, is going to be Taylor Green, the quarterback for Boise State. How he does is going to dictate a large part what Boise State does in this game. Now, he played pretty well overall versus Washington. It's just his receivers were not able to help him out and get those catches. A lot of drops, 8 to 10 drops in that matchup, which then caught him at 19 out of 39 for only 244 yards passing, a touchdown, 2 interceptions, one a pick that was on him, a second a pick that was on him, but it was in garbage time. So not really necessarily where Boise State was still competing at that point, kind of a desperation throw more than anything else. But that was not, it reflected poorly on him. But more than anything, it was on the offensive play calling, which again, 39 passing attempts for a quarterback not known for his arm, who is still developing that portion, and one of the most athletic quarterbacks Boise State has ever had. He's one of the best running backs, probably the best running quarterbacks Boise State has ever had at this program, and he only ran 5 times for 31 yards. It was a major point of discussion over this past week why Boise State didn't run Taylor Green more, and we're going to have to see, does Boise State come out and emphasize the part of the game that Taylor Green does better than almost anyone else in college football, while also continuing to build his passing ability? That is going to be a major point. If Boise State can do those things and Taylor Green can perform well, Boise State will have a strong chance of winning this game. Second key player for Boise State is going to be Ashton Jeanty. George Holani, of course, a part of this running program, both of them starting backs for Boise State. George Holani ahead on the depth chart, but Ashton Jeanty, he took over that game for Boise State offensively. Both of Boise State's touchdowns were from Ashton Jeanty. Both of them, a rushing touchdown for Ashton Jeanty, and then also a receiving touchdown for Ashton Jeanty. He had 153 combined yards between rushing and receiving. He led the team in receiving, and 2 rushing touchdowns for Boise State. So if Boise State's going to have a big game, a win in this program, of course, George Holani, of course, part of this, he's going to need to have a good game as well. But a lot of it, I think, is going to be coming and focusing here on Ashton Jeanty and trying to really tap into his potential. He is going to have a major game in addition to Taylor Green. Again, it all starts with emphasizing that rushing attack that Boise State should be so strong at, but that didn't focus on versus Washington. My third key player of the game, and he had the best game out of any Boise State player, a career game, James Ferguson Reynolds, 7 punts. Course, don't like that number, 7 punts, but when he got out there, he flipped field position. 7 punts for 52.1 yard average overall, long as 62. The average would have been longer if Boise State's coverage unit, which needs to improve, had done a little bit better job of letting some punts roll and then stopping some punts from rolling. They let one roll into the end zone that otherwise was checking up right at the 1. 3 Boise State players right there ran right past them. So Boise State's coverage is going to need to get a little bit better. Their protection is going to need to get a little bit better. James did an amazing job of getting a couple of punts off that were nearly blocked. Both of them outstanding punts, but they were that close to being blocked. And UCF will watch that tape, and if Boise State's not careful, they will come and capitalize on that. So Boise State's coverage team and protection need to get a little bit better. But overall, Boise State's punting game was very strong versus UCF, and it all started with James Ferguson Reynolds. Boise State's not going to be able to score every time they touch the ball. UCF's too good. So Boise State's going to need to sometimes be able to flip that field position and give UCF a long drive to have to come back, give Boise State a chance to maybe do a little bit of field position battles, and it all starts with James Ferguson Reynolds. So quarterback play for Boise State's key. The running game is going to be key, and that starts here with Ashton Jeanty and continue to build the performance he had last game. And then the special teams here with James Ferguson Reynolds for Boise State. Now looking at UCF, They have some great players. They have a great quarterback across the aisle here from Taylor Green in John Rice Plumlee. He was a big rushing quarterback last season. We saw that in the opening game versus Kent State, but he also has an arm. 22 out of 30, 281 yards, 3 touchdowns, also rushed 8 times for 90 yards and a touchdown in the game versus Kent State. Now, again, it's Kent State's defense, but he is going to be a major threat, a major factor for Boise State to stop. And remember, this is a Boise State secondary that's basically completely rebuilt. They lost most of their starters in the secondary, a couple of cornerbacks to safety, their nickel, and they've had to rebuild. Boise State safeties were burnt bad last game versus Washington. They found a one-on-one matchups they liked, and they kept going the deep ball. And Boise State really, except for a couple of plays, which if you look back on them, part of it is the throw by the quarterback, except for a couple of plays, could not stop the deep ball. That is a point of emphasis here for UCF. They've brought in an offensive coordinator who likes to focus and build that deep ball, and the recipe for success is there if UCF can capitalize on it, and Boise State does not make the adjustments. Boise State's got to make those adjustments, not just from that game, but also at halftime. Boise State didn't really make any adjustments versus Washington, and it continued to cost them. So they're going to have to come out, present strong versus UCF. Boise State last time they played did not make good adjustments in the second half. So if Boise State's in the game or winning the game at first half, they can't just assume a win. They've got to go out and win this game in the second half, just the way they are winning or attempting to in the first half. They've got to make those adjustments. And against a quarterback like Plumlee, who is able to run and throw, you're going to have to be able to combine your defense to come out and stop both of those. Now, there are going to be some opportunities because this is a guy who does make some mistakes. 2 interceptions versus Kent State and a fumble. So this is not the perfect, flawless type quarterback that Penix was. Boise State's going to have some opportunities, but this is still a quarterback that can hurt you, and especially with his legs and with his arm. Now, for the second key player here for UCF, it's going to be running back John Richards. 12 carries for 100 yards, 8.3 yard average. And their second or third key player over here, but second running back also, I believe is actually the starter, is R.J. Harvey. Both these guys kind of like Boise State's got his Helani Genti punch. This is their 1-2 punch here for them. 10 carries for 84 yards, and again, another 8+ yard average per carry, 8.4 yard average per carry for a touchdown. Now, they didn't have the prolific seasons that Genti and Helani did last year. Richards had right around 300+ yards rushing, and Harvey had right around 700+ yards rushing, but they both showed that they can get long gains versus the defense is not prepared for them, and Boise State's going to have a hard time stopping this 1-2 punch where they don't get tired because they're both pounding away. Now, Boise State's front seven did a great job of stopping Washington, but they're going to have a much more difficult time versus a mobile rushing quarterback and a two-headed rushing attack here, which matches up well against what Boise State also presents on offense. Now, keys to the game for Boise State. I've mentioned it already, but key number 1 is run Taylor Green. Boise State did not run Taylor Green in the first game, like I've already said, and that was the most frustrating part. I mean, RG3 was up in the booth saying it over and over again. And when Taylor Green would have a great run, he said, I want to see more of that. And Bronco Nation was going, yes, we agree. And we didn't see the legs used in the running game. Yes, Taylor Green needs to develop into more than just a rushing threat. And I think he's shown he can. But one, when you take Taylor Green's arm and just focus on the arm and axe his legs and don't use them, you are splitting in half the capabilities of this quarterback. There's something that sets Taylor Green apart from any Boise State quarterback that's ever come before him, and it's not his arm. I do think he can develop that and become a threat with his throwing, with his passing game, but it is his legs that make him a unique quarterback like no Boise State quarterback has been before. There's similarities you can draw up, Jared Zabransky, Grant Hedrick, but this quarterback, Taylor Green, he eclipses all of them in his rushing abilities, and if you don't use them, you are halving his potential, probably more than that, because his rushing game is such a big part of what he brings to the table. Secondly, this wide receiver core is not built. They are not ready for a pass-heavy attack. We saw that. So many passes dropped. Part of that is first game jitters, but also part of it is having no established first starting wide receiver and a lot of inexperience in the passing core. I think the ceiling is very high for this passing team, for this wide receiver core. I think the passing ceiling is very high for them. I think they can reach that, but they're not at that level yet. And regardless, Boise State's strength is not in the passing game. Their strength is in the rushing game, and they need to develop and push on it, especially with a defense with so many new faces, such a young defense that's having to rebuild. You want to give them time to rest, time to make their adjustments, have that discussion with the coaches, and come back in ready to fight again at 110+% by giving them nice, long offensive drives, 5-7 minute drives, eat up the clock, reduce the opponent's chances to score on them, and give them a chance to rest. Boise State has got to emphasize the rushing game in general, but most importantly, Taylor Green's legs have got to be a factor. I think that if Taylor Green doesn't rush for 60-plus yards, Boise State's going to have a tough time winning this game. If his legs are not being used effectively, then that is a major, major mistake by the coaching staff. We've got to see Taylor Green's legs involved in the game. They suck the defense down and make the passing game easier. They inspire him with confidence as he's able to see the momentum change, and they just add another element that this Boise State offense is missing when they're not involved. Key number 2 here, don't beat yourself up. The final score was traumatic, to say the least, for Boise State versus Washington. But the truth is, Boise State was much closer than that final score showed. 19-56, there was a score in garbage time that would otherwise have made it 19-49. There was a nail-in-the-coffin type play there, right at the fourth quarter, that put Boise State out of it. But before that, for 3+ quarters of that game, Boise State was right there within 2 possessions. The score at halftime was only 12-28. Boise State was within 2 possessions for the majority of this matchup. And if you look back on that game, and I suffered, I went through the fire, and I rewatched the matchup, and I also pulled all the positives from it and made a highlight video. So go watch that and remind yourself all the good Boise State did. But I went through and I watched that game again, and Boise State is right there. 8 to 10 drops that would have put Boise State in a position to finish some drives with scores. At least field goals, maybe touchdowns, take away opportunities from Washington to score. That's a different game. Boise State has the punt that trickles into the end zone. That punt alone, Boise State at the time was 19-35 versus Washington. They let the punt trickle in that otherwise would have been stopped inside the 1. Even if they stop it at the 5, you're still inside the 5. Washington then went out and put 17 yards down before they had to punt. So Boise State was forcing a punt. Obviously, retroactive, it's a different scenario, different situation. Maybe something else happens. Maybe Boise State gets a safety and gets the ball back with 2 points on top. But maybe something else happens. But if you just take the raw facts as they were and just rewind them a little, Washington starts at the 1. Inside their 1. They put 17 yards out, so they're now at their 17. They then punt. The punt was only 38 yards, so it puts Boise State at their own 45, a chance to come down and maybe get a field goal in at least, or a touchdown, and make this a more manageable game. Maybe make it a 1-possession game coming into the fourth quarter. What happened instead, Boise State, of course, gives the ball back. Then they're unable to score. They get the ball back to Washington, and then another opportunity happened. It was still 19-38. Boise State was still in this game. And then the unthinkable happened for Washington. What Boise State fans have been waiting for all game, a turnover. First one of the game. They force a turnover from Washington's leading wide receiver. They force the ball out. There's 5, I think maybe 4 or 5 Boise State defenders right there on top. And somehow, between the 5 of them, they couldn't get them. It reminded me of the Florida State game where Florida State had the ball knock off of one of their returns, and there were 3 Florida State guys right there, and Boise State still managed to get the ball back. That's what it was, except this time it hurt Boise. One player, the guy who lost it, gets his own ball back. Boise State gets that ball. They're right there on Washington's side of the field, I believe, or right there at the 50. It's 19-38. They go down. They have a chance to score. Instead, Washington finished that drive, put the score pretty much out of reach. That was the nail-in-the-coffin play. Washington would then go on to score a few more plays, but then that made it a 3-possession game with right around a quarter left, and it put Boise State out of that. Boise State had a chance to turn the game around. They had a chance to win the game, despite an offensive focus that I don't think they should have gone with. Despite the mismatch, despite all of the advantages that Washington had, Boise State could have won this game. It was that close, and they didn't because they beat themselves. Boise State, just go out and do the opposite. Play up to your potential. Don't make the major mistakes. Some mistakes will happen here or there. You're going to miss tackles. You're going to let people go open. But dropping passes that are right in your hand, letting punts that you have 3 guys go right past you, missing a fumble when you have 4 or 5 players right on top of it, those are not just simple mistakes. Those are mind-boggling, random luck, horrifying mistakes that if you just take those out of the game, Boise State has a chance to win or at least keep the score manageable. This game versus UCF, lower tier opponent, still a challenge, still a Power 5 team, but you take those mistakes out, Boise State plays up to the same level they did versus Washington, but take the mistakes out, they win the game. This key is so important for Boise State. Have an offensive focus that works to your strengths, Taylor's legs, but also don't hurt yourself, don't beat yourself. The old adage is most games are lost, not won. Washington did a lot to win that game, but Boise State definitely contributed to losing it on their end. Don't do it in this matchup. All right, key number 3, contain UCF's quarterback. His legs are going to hurt you if you don't stop him. Boise State has had trouble the last couple of years stopping running quarterbacks. They definitely couldn't stop Dylan Gabriel when they played him in 2021. So stopping UCF's quarterback is going to be huge. This is a kid that ran for over 800 yards last season, had 90 yards versus Kent State, 11 touchdowns on the ground in 2022. His legs are a major factor. The defensive staff knows this. Stopping him is going to be key. Your front seven is probably the strength of this team right now, and your secondary is not. So bringing the focus, the blitz, to force some mistakes. This is a quarterback that when he puts it in the air, is not necessarily a safe bet. Now, last year he wasn't terrible through the air. He threw 8 picks against 14 touchdowns, but he also wasn't throwing it a ton. If Boise State can force the game into the air, there will be opportunities for this Boise State secondary to go out and capitalize on some potential mistakes. But the biggest thing you cannot allow are easy, chew-it-up yards on the ground from either these running backs, but most importantly, this quarterback who has the capability that versus Kent State, that's really what kind of drew the momentum, is those long runs by Plumlee that they then capitalized on and were able to, they were going to win that game regardless, but that really kind of inspired and pushed the offense forward. So in the same way that Taylor Green's legs are going to help Boise State, stopping the legs here for UCF, forcing them up into a spot where they're not necessarily quite as comfortable. This is a balanced attack team, but they are primarily a rush-focused program. They run the ball more than they pass. So taking the ground game away, and especially the quarterback's legs, and forcing them into the air is going to work towards Boise State's favor. And it's also bringing that blitz, rattling the quarterback, is going to allow this secondary, is going to bring the balance a little bit more even, allow them some opportunities to capitalize on some mistakes. So 3 keys: run Taylor Green, don't beat yourself, and contain UCF's quarterback. Boise State does those 3 things, they have a very, very good chance of winning this game. Now, they're not favored to. Let's look at this overall summary between these 2 programs. Now, UCF, 2022, they averaged 43.9 rush attempts a game for about 228 yards, and passing was only 32 attempts a game. So right there, it was at 11 attempts less for around 241 yards. So rushing and passing right about the same amount. Very balanced attack, a little bit heavier on the pass, but they were rushing it a lot more than they were passing the ball. And we saw that versus Kent State. Versus Kent State, they had 723 yards. Tells you how bad Kent State is. But 35 of those were pass attempts, 46 were rushing attempts. Now, part of that's going to be grinding out the clock kind of stuff, but this is a team that relies heavily on its rushing game. Now, Boise State versus Washington were burned through the air, 490 yards passing allowed. But they were very, very good versus the run. 78 yards allowed. And Washington did come out trying to run it and couldn't. Part of the reason they went to the air is because of that. Also, part of the reason is that's where their strength is, and they were always going to do that. But Boise State was able to really put a clamp down on this rushing team. Now, it's not going to be that result versus UCF. UCF's going to get 100-plus yards at least because UCF's strength is in the running game, unlike Washington. But Boise State defense versus the run, it was very, very strong. Their front seven is stronger than their secondary because they brought in a lot of transfers there. The rush defense is not quite as complex as the pass coverage is. So Boise State's advantage here is going to be versus the run, stopping that run first and letting things work itself out in the secondary is going to be key for Boise State, like we talked about. This is a game that Boise State needs to win. There is a little bit more of a focus here for Boise State winning this game after losing a game versus Washington. They've got the chip on the shoulder because they're not ranked, or they're not favored in this matchup. It's versus the Power 5, it's at home, but it's also a feeling of you need to reset this season. UCF is riding high after an easy win here, and they have all the Power 5 schedule ahead of them with the Big 12. This win is not as important for them. I mean, they are, maybe if they lose, they're not going to go to the playoffs, but this is a tough Big 12 schedule. They're probably not going to the playoffs anyway. They can win the Big 12 and automatically go to a New Year's Six game. Boise State's season, to a certain extent, rides on this game. So Boise State is coming in with a lot more importance in the matchup. The game is on the blue. I talked about how hard it is to win on the blue. Boise State was closer versus Washington than the score showed. They're not as big an underdog as the percentages are showing. They did not lose as badly as the score shows they did. 2021, that loss for Boise State was a major shattering moment that reset this coaching staff's trajectory, and they are going to be so focused on this game, almost like a rivalry game. It feels like a rivalry game for Boise State. But more importantly than anything, Boise State lost that game, but just barely. They almost beat a UCF team that I think, and UCF fans, you know more about your school, and you're probably going to disagree with me because fans always think the team that's right now is the best until it shows it's not. But I think that 2021 team was better than this team. And, you know, Dillon Gabriel is a better quarterback than Plumlee, and Bowser, I mean, I think that he's a better quarterback than either of these two guys are. That program, to me, that UCF team, if Dillon Gabriel doesn't hurt himself, that's a New Year's Six team, I think, that UCF team. So Boise State almost beat that team with a much worse Boise State team. That first year in Harsin was a much worse Boise State team than the one they currently have. This is a much better Boise State team versus a slightly worse UCF team. And they almost won with a much worse Boise State team versus a much better program. So Boise State, if they could do that away, with everything else that's working in Boise State's favor, they can get this win versus UCF. Boise State needs this win. It's a chip on their shoulder. People are really, really overreacting against both these programs. Boise State fans are acting like the season is over for them against a loss to top 10 program, and ESPN is updating UCF's win projections to 10 wins and fourth potentially in the Big 12 after destroying a bottom tier, almost FCS school in Kent State. So everyone is fluctuating both ways. You're going to see much more clearly what both these programs are capable of, and I have high expectations for this Boise State team this season. So because of everything that I've said, because I think Boise State is going to effectively accomplish my keys to the game, because I think Boise State has an advantage in this matchup playing at home and everything that this matchup means, and I think that Boise State's strengths complement or work well against what UCF brings to the table, I am predicting a Boise State win. I think that there's going to be a lot of clock ground up, so scoring opportunities won't be quite as high. But I think Boise State wins this game 34, so 4 touchdowns and a couple of field goals, 34 to UCF's 24. I think this Boise State defense has a come-to-Jesus moment. They revitalize. Spencer Danielson uses the big paycheck that he's being paid to get the wheels working, unclog anything that's up there, and come in with the best game plan that Boise State can against this UCF team. It's a matchup that I'm sure both programs have had circled for a long time, but especially Boise State. You know that this coaching staff is prepared to come in and face this program. I think that lessons were learned. Andy Avalos seems to be leaning in the direction of lessons were learned versus Washington, so we'll see a different offense. Hopefully the offense we were promised with Bush Hamden, and I think that this is going to be a program-defining win here for Boise State versus UCF. So thanks so much for watching. Again, put your comments in the description, comments in the video comment section. Let me know your score prediction. I'm kind of falling apart here at the end. I've been talking for a long time. I did this video and then the UCF podcast video, and then the fan keys the game. I'm ready to wrap it up for the night. But thanks so much for watching. Make sure you like, subscribe, and as always, go Big Blue!